Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Keyboard Chronicles, a podcast for keyboard players of the gigging variety. I'm your host, David Holloway, and it's brilliant as always to be here with you. And I have with me, as usual, the sublime Paul Bindig. How are things, sir?
Oh, awesome, David. Great to be here once again.
Yeah, really good. It's been nearly a month since we last caught up, and huge thanks to all those people that listened to the David Rosenthal two-parters. We had lots of good feedback, and it was a bit of a thrill last week to be in New York myself and see the big banner for Billy Joel's consecutive shows in Madison Square Garden while I was there. So that was a bit of a surreal experience. Great to be back. And we're going from one end of the spectrum to the other, from Billy Joel to what I would argue is one of Australia's most iconic, both piano players and songwriters, and that's Mr. David Bridie. Now, if you're outside of Australia, I do strongly recommend you still listen to this show because what David has to say is obviously really good, but also the music and the links in the show notes to what he does are well and truly worth a listen. You may thank yourself down the track for taking the time. So, we're very excited to have David on, Paul.
Yeah, and I would say to our listeners and viewers, if you think you haven't heard David's music, you're probably wrong.
Mm.
Very prolific. A lot of work with some seminal Australian bands, which we'll discuss in the show, but also film and TV work, very prolific. So and he's produced a couple of very well-known artists, particularly in this country. So that's
Right.
very, very exciting.
So, yeah. All right. So let's go on and talk to David Bridie. David, thank you again for joining us. Really appreciate it. It's nice to all be in the same time zone, actually. It's a bit of a novelty.
Yeah, especially given COVID, there's a lot. Yeah.
Well, actually, let's talk about that, actually, to kick off. I hadn't planned on starting with that, but it's a good point. So over the last 2 years, I mean, you're known for doing a lot of live work, let alone your prodigious recording output. How have you gotten through the last 2 or 3 years? How have you kept yourself busy?
Oh, COVID's hit musicians as much as it's affected anyone. I think anyone involved in live performance. So my heart goes out to all musicians, especially I've been thinking of those, people who have done their first record who are really excited about, the younger men or women who are looking forward to going out on the road, who, had been, finally got this record and they were wanting to go and play it to people and go to festivals and all that stuff. It wasn't as difficult for me in that regard, in that you can kind of sit back and go, okay, well, look, this is what it is. And it's, for me, I just moved down to the Apollo Bay, to the shipwreck coast, just before COVID hit. It was very fortunate. So for me, I was getting used to this new environment and setting up things. But for the young artists, it really affected. For musicians, very totally reliant on live playing, of which there are many, because as we know, that's where more income comes from these days for a lot of artists than from record sales, because people aren't paying money for music, but they'll pay money to go to festivals and gigs. Kind of interesting. George Telek, one of our artists on One Talk, has his album released today, and he recorded that over COVID. And one of the positives out of it is it's forced people to try to reinvent how they go about stuff. So George has done this new record in Rabaul in Papua New Guinea. He wasn't able to travel, and he got together with some of the artists that he collaborated with on his early records, with this band called Pone and Wok, who were really big in PNG. So there's a guitarist, John Warbat, who he finally did collaborated on a record with, and that was kind of maybe forced out a little bit by COVID. And it's a wonderful record. So there's a wonderful wonderful project that COVID forced people to do. But yeah, my first point is that it was a really difficult time for musicians, and hopefully we've come out the other side. But I think we copped it harder than anyone.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we'll definitely be talking about One Talk and stuff later on too. So looking forward to that. So just, we usually start off though, is we're going back a few years. So I have no idea, David. How did you originally get into music? You obviously got great piano chops, and let alone your singing. But how did you, as a young person, get into music in the first place?
My grandmother was musical. She had a piano. I remember my mum in her. She's very elderly now and tends to repeat things. But one of the things that she does repeat is how much her mother, Ruby Violet, loved my piano playing and would always get me to play on their piano up in Parramatta in Sydney. So there was encouragement there, and we always had a piano in the house. So it was an upright. So that was always there. Oh, look, my memory of learning piano lessons, I really didn't like very much. I sang in a church choir for a while, and I got kicked out of that because a friend of mine got me laughing at what he thought was a rude metaphor in one of the songs that we were singing, and we were giggling in church, so we got kicked out of that. But I do look back at that was maybe 8 months, but just having to, you were following notes and singing, and yeah. So I mean, all these things work, and then I guess I was part of a generation where, the film clip was coming around for the first time, and we're in. So I was in that sort of countdown generation, but also that post-punk, where music meant a lot, especially when I got, when I left school. And so I was an enthusiast for music, and so it was always around. So I think that's probably what, it was something I pursued, obviously, because I didn't finish uni because of music, because Not Drowning Waving had already started. So that's what I do now.
No, great. And so it's pretty hard to compartmentalize your career, but we're going to try in this interview. So we'll talk about obviously your solo work, Not Drowning Waving, your movie work, My Friend the Chocolate Cake, and so on, and your record label. But Paul, I thought we'd start just with the solo work.
Yeah, and look, it's interesting because given how busy you are, David, I mean, your output's prodigious. So, but there's also been quite a few solo projects as well. I'm sort of curious what's and it may have been different for different solo projects, but what's been the impetus for a solo project? What is it that sparks the muse in you to want to start something, a solo project, and then how's that informed the work you've done so far?
I mean, as we know, with all of these questions, there's no one exact answer. But I started my solo career after Not Drowning Waving had finished, so My Friend the Chocolate Cake formed towards the end of Not Drowning Waving as a side project. So that was all acoustic, whereas Not Drowning Waving it was quite big production and lots of studio work, quite a big band, and it was my main songwriting outlet. So I guess for when Active Free Choice, I started working on that in 1999. So the solo record for me was my third project or third band. So it was about having control over it, but still wanting to collaborate with people, but be able to pick and choose who I could collaborate with, Paul and David. Yeah, and I always wrote songs, and I guess because My Friend the Chocolate Cake was quite, it was all acoustic, so shallow violin, double bass. There was a certain sound there which was fantastic. But I think after doing that, when Not Drowning Waving had stopped, I missed being able to muck around with electronica and loops in the studio more. Chocolate Cake was very much we play it live and we play it as a band. So.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I mean, there's Active Free Choice, Hotel Radio, Wake,
Succumb,
and the Wisdom Line, and a couple of other little sort of minor things in there. So it's now there's now 6 albums there. So it's kind of it's a thing in the same way that Not Drowning Waving and My Friend the Chocolate Cake work as well, in that there's more than half a dozen albums of each. Yeah.
And just on that, David, I know a lot of artists do this now because it's so challenging to get a solo album up, even if you have your own studio. I know I think it was succumb, but correct me if I'm wrong. You did a sort of a Kickstarter on that, and I know I played I was very happy to contribute to that. And it seemed like a really effective way to get an album up. Is that something you still consider?
I took a lot of effort, so I sort of did that for Wake. It was, and
Wake, yeah,
yeah, no, there was a once. Look, I think it's a good way. I mean, this is a whole discussion in itself. I mean, the relationship between a record company and artists is very different these days, and have got to a point where I've decided we're actually, I don't mind doing it without that support. So you can kind of you go you forge your own direction on it. You still have a record company playing the role of a distributor, and you might have a publicist, which used to be a record company domain. Funding it yourself is easier when you've got your own studio. It's about kind of putting some money aside and then releasing the record, and you get more returns once it's released. So whilst, yeah, look, I think those GoFundMes or funding arrangements are really good. They are quite time consuming. So I did it once. I might do it again, but yeah. I didn't for the wisdom.
Something else I always am intrigued by with solo artists is when you've got multiple concurrent projects going at the same time, how do you decide from a creative point of view what that's going to be something for my solo project, that's going to be for this other particular project I'm working on with others, collaborating? I mean, how do you make those sort of choices, or do you just sort of sequester the time and punch out a heap of work for a solo project?
Yes, it's an interesting question. I don't have an exact answer for it, except I know that by the time it gets to, okay, you might have in the 2 months before starting a record, there might be 20 pieces and thinking, okay, these are in the ballpark. And then that gets whittled down to 15 or 13. And out of those 20, some of them there might be a really cool chord sequence that comes out of a film soundtrack that I go, that would make a really good song, and I really like those chords. And then putting some words to it, or there might be some words that are hanging around from something that lend itself. That I think that's certainly a song for the album. And when push comes to shove, when the deadline enforces kind of creativity sometimes.
Yeah.
You try to set it up in the right way. You have some rehearsals with a few people, have some nights in the studio where you're mucking up and going, Jesus, I've got to make these decisions in 3 weeks' time. And then in 3 weeks' time, you go, I think at this point in time, these are the best 13 songs or 14 or 15 songs to work on. There's no right and wrong, but there are better ways. You kind of trust your process and your judgment after a while.
Yep.
But there's always a song that doesn't make it onto a record that you listen to 2 years later and go, I really should have recorded that in this one. Whilst I thought at the time this would come up really well, it didn't for me. That's the beauty of and the subjectivity of the whole thing.
So as a songwriter and also a singer, what comes first for you, words or music, or is it a bit more organic than that?
Again, no right and wrong one, Paul. For example, if I'm sitting down at the piano mucking around and I've got these chords that I really, really like, in that case, it'll be, I think, that's a keeper. And other times, you keep the little sort of notebook and write down phrases and things, and words will come up and going, oh, that'll make good, and then you've got to find some music for it. And then sometimes used to happen more. But you sit down and they both come together at the same time.
Yeah, nice. You mentioned earlier you have enjoyed playing around with loops and electronica and these sorts of things. And what our viewers and listeners may or may not know is you've got an extremely prolific output in the world of TV and movies. Really interested in how you got into that side of things. What sort of dragged you into the world of doing music for TV and movies, and your approach there?
John Phillips, who's a guitarist in Not Drowning Waving, and I used to work at this little studio in St Kilda that was called the Pig Pen. And so the first, Another Pond, The Little Desert, and Cold and the Crackle, the first 3 Not Drowning Waving records had a lot of instrumentals on it. and we were in our early 20s. First Not Drowning Waving record was when we were 21. And there were some people who were at the film and TV school in Melbourne at Swinburne, also in Sydney, who we knew who were just starting their career. And because we had these instrumentals, some of them were like piano and sampled sound, whether it be conversations of old men talking on a tram or frogs down by a creek or something, or John had quite a textural style of guitar stuff. So it was a combination of those two things. People were saying, hey, can we use some of your music in this film? Which I think was the instrumental side of it that did it, and also maybe the more reflective and atmospheric side of some of those tracks off those 3 records. And so as their careers were starting off and our careers were starting off, we just kept working with them, and then they'd get bigger budget projects and say, hey, do you want to come in and maybe at the beginning it was using a couple of Not Drowning Waving songs in a piece, and then next time it'll be, hey, can you compose something original for this? And both John and I really liked the idea of, you make records, you do gigs, but you also do, some film soundtrack stuff or write something for a play or for a dance piece or something. It was a great way of using contemporary music, great way of using the studio. And, yes, it meant that you didn't, it spread the load a bit of how to make, how to develop your practice as a musician and an artist, but also how to kind of pay your rent and all that. And it just kind of kept going from there. And now I'm 60.
You don't look it though. Now, so let's go back to, you mentioned John and Not Drowning Waving. So we will cover off a little bit that. Obviously, looking back on that 20-year-old from a 60-year-old, what's your take on that as a collaboration? Because it's aged extremely well. It's still a very popular band. What's your perspective looking back on that period?
The first thing is, a couple of weeks ago I did a gig and John played at it, a big band gig at the Brunswick Ballroom, and I was talking to my partner afterwards saying, it's just quite effortless with John. It's been quite one of those friendships that you have in life, and in our case, a working relationship that is, I've got the utmost respect for his playing. We feel really comfortable around each other. We can make suggestions to each other artistically that are never taken the wrong way. He can say to me, that sucks. And I go, yeah, okay. Because from him, I know he's coming from a point of view, because I know he thinks a lot of my stuff doesn't suck. So when he goes, actually, Johnny doesn't use the word suck. He would say, I reckon there's better chords than that, or maybe we do that chorus too many times, or those kind of things. So, but Not Drowning Waving was more than just John and I. It was quite an amazing group of musicians and people. Russell, Tim, Rowan and James, and then Helen towards the end, each added something quite special. Look, we were young too. When you're young, you kind of have this, artistic drive that's kind of trying to do all these things. And we took some stuff on. I mean, Not Drowning Waving did a couple of film soundtracks for Proof and Hammers Over the Anvil. We also, pursued the Papua New Guinea thing. We recorded albums not in record studios, but at Montserrat, or, Tim Cole as a sound engineer was very adventurous. And we were adventurous as well. So, and we did all those albums, and it was, So I'd like to think that the stuff stands up over time.
And it does. And I've never seen you as the sort of person that looks back too much, David, but I can't imagine it's something you've ever had discussions about having another go, just based on the scope and the change of the times and whatever. You've never been tempted to revisit that sort of stuff?
I'm tempted. We did come out and do some gigs for Womadelaide. We did Womadelaide, and we did the Commonwealth Games from Melbourne. We did a couple of gigs, and that was great. James, our percussionist, wasn't playing. His arm was injured, and he's kind of Look, you never say never. Somebody was talking the other day about wanting to rejig the Tabaran record with those players, which if the right circumstances, and it's not cheap either. There's a lot of people, and there's also flights from PNG and all that would be involved in re-getting Tabaran together. But actually, Johnny works at RMIT, and we did. Some of his students wanted to make a film clip, so 5 of us went in there, and Rowan, Russell, Helen, Johnny, and I went in there, and we played a few songs, and the students filmed it, and it was an enjoyable experience, and it was like, we still got it,
Yeah, absolutely. And then with My Friend the Chocolate Cake, that's a project that obviously had a huge longevity and has only recently wrapped up. And unless I'm mistaken, though, it is wrapped up for good, based on your loss of Andrew back in 2016.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Look, again, something may come up that we'd that might get us up playing. Everyone gets on really, really well in that band. So it wouldn't surprise me if at some point, but it's not in the foreseeable future.
No. And so apart from the apocryphal story that My Friend the Chocolate Cake formed as after Not Drowning Waving, so that you didn't have to carry as many amps around, I mean, what was the impetus for such a different style? And again, looking back, what are some of the key standouts for you of just what you achieved with that band, or what the band achieved?
So it was not wanting to carry a lot of gear, but it was also that's a good lesson for bands. Not Drowning Waving had got to the point that so to rehearse you needed a kind of a whole lot of transport to get all the gear to the studio, but we also had a lot of band meetings, and band meetings are great and very democratic, but they take up a lot of time, and in fairness, and this wasn't anything to do with Not Drowning Waving's fault, we had some contractual stuff going on between when we got signed to Reprise to Warner's in America, and we were delayed for a while to put a record out, and I had I'd gone on a holiday over to New Zealand to near the Bay of Plenty, and came back with a whole lot of songs, and it was going to be ages before Not Drowning Waving was doing a record. Now, they were kind of different because I'd sort of written them on holidays, and this was kind of a rural house and with a kind of out-of-tune piano there. And so Helen got Hope, who was a friend of hers, and I got Russell from Not Drowning Waving, Andrew Carswell, who I worked with, and Andrew Richardson, who was old schoolmate. And it was just a muck around thing. It was just to play some music that didn't have any big consequences to. So it started really kind of laissez-faire, and there was a real beauty in that. And we came up with this ridiculously stupid name, and we did a couple of gigs at a place called Madigan's in Sydney Road, and it just kept going. It kind of felt good, and we went into Sing Sing Studios in Richmond and for one day, and we just played all the 15 songs that we'd recorded, and that became the first record. And for a while there, it kept going with Not Drowning Waving, and then Not Drowning Waving hit a wall, and then My Friend the Chocolate Cake became the main potato, which was easier for me to do, I think, because I was doing film soundtrack stuff. I was also producing Archie Roach and Christine Arnaud at the time, and working with follow-up records with George Telek. So there was a number at the beginning. Having this all acoustic outfit didn't narrow my musical palette, or like what Paul was talking before about liking to work with samples and loops. Johnny and I still kept doing some film stuff, so it was only after about 5 years that it was kind of going, I did miss that sort of Not Drowning Waving live experience, because it was quite for all the atmospherics and spaciousness in a lot of Not Drowning Waving's material. There was a real wall of sound there with Russell and James having the two two drummers, percussionists, and Johnny's guitar sound, especially when he pushed it, it was quite a wall of sound. It was quite a loud gig. Yeah, I'm sort of rambling a little bit there.
No, that's good. That's good. And it's interesting you said that some of the initial songwriting happened in the country, because I'd argue that First My Friend, the Chocolate Cake album is one of the most authentic albums about rural life, even though most of the songs aren't about rural life, that I've ever heard, and things like Uncle Bill's Paddock and stuff like that. So it's interesting that some of that songwriting did start in the country.
Yeah, How Green Was My Valley, and Uncle Bill's Paddock, and even the instrumentals kind of have Slow Storm Brews, and John Elliott Snows have that kind. It was quite a rustic record. Maybe it was I was foretelling moving down the coast down here. So.
Yeah. And so, I mean, and we will be linking in the show notes to a range of examples from all of these bands. But, David, over the period of those albums, there was a lot of evolution, though, in your songwriting, and not so much style, but songwriting and the topics covered. It sounded like you still had a lot more to say, even when you wrapped up. There was still plenty of, what would you call it, shots in the locker?
You're talking
creatively?
Or
like I totally get why you finished up My Friend the Chocolate Cake. It's just it certainly felt like you finished on top, that you weren't a spent force by any stretch.
Oh well, we with the cake we started in 1989, and it was 2019. It was 2020 when we stopped. So it was like 31 years. Yeah. So that was. Yeah, it was maybe. Look, it was me. I kind of wanted to concentrate more on my solo stuff. I thought the Revival meeting, the last Chocolate Cake record, was a ripper. I really kind of thought we came up with something really strong, and that last tour was fantastic. And it just felt like a going out on top kind of thing. It was a decision made by me to give myself more space to do other stuff, and so it was probably a selfish decision in that way, because I think, it could have been, well, why don't we just stop it for a while and then take it up again in a bunch of years' time, which probably would have been a better way of approaching it. But it felt right at the time, in terms of, I just felt really, with all of our lives, we get other things come into it, non-musical things come into it, and I just felt like I was chasing my tail a lot. One took, because it was a really big commitment. I felt like I wasn't putting enough concentration into my solo albums. So that probably had a bit to do with that. But yeah, no, there's a lot of Chocolate Cake records I'm really, really proud of. The first one, Bridie, was a great record to work on, and good luck as well. And then at the the Revival meeting and Home Improvements, I'm proud of all those records. Yeah,
it's an amazing legacy. And one other part of your legacy that we're really keen to touch on, David, is your work in production. And you sort of briefly mentioned it then, that was taking up more and more of your time. What our viewers and listeners may not know about you is you're very well renowned as a producer of Melanesian and Indigenous Australian artists, specifically, as well as other production work. I'm really interested in what drove your passion towards that, and what itch that scratches for you.
It came out of the Not Drowning Waving record, so that was kind of. Papua New Guinea is Australia's closest neighbour, and a fellow who did the lights for Not Drowning Waving and did some film projections was a guy named Mark Worth, and he enticed me up to Papua New Guinea in 1986, and I fell in love with the place. Also met George Telek on that first trip, and George was quite a big music performer, so that kind of was happenstance that George and I, and then Not Drowning Waving went up to Rabaul to record the record of Pacific Gold. And out of that record came the opportunity to produce Archie Roach's Yummy Dreaming record and Christine Arnou's Styling Up record, and they were both big experiences for me, big learning experiences, and both amazing artists to work with. Archie, wow. who passed away quite recently. But Archie was, that first record of Archie's was just so important. And second records are always a bit different, because the first record that anyone makes, you've got all the songs that you've written from, the age of 16 upwards. And and Archie's, I just learned so much about First Nation Australian stuff, so much that I maybe had known about, but not really. You hear about stuff, but to actually be there, and when people are talking about it in a room, and just spending all the time that you do with an artist when you're producing, it was quite life-changing for me. And Christine's record as well. She was different from Archie personally, in that this was her first record. She was a young dancer. She had this real energy and vibrancy about her. And whereas Archie kind of had these considered things to say and was much more of a singer-songwriter, whereas Christine's record was coming as a dancer when we were sort of, listening to Nina Cherry records and Massive Attack records and a lot of the Torres Strait Island stuff. And also, obviously, Christine being from Saibai Island up in the north, quite near Papua New Guinea, actually, about 5 kilometres from the Papua New Guinea mainland, and worked together with a great mixer by the name of Michael Kopperman, who worked with Prince, and Michael was fantastic to work with as well. Johnny Phillips was involved with that. And so out of those 3 records, the Not Drowning Waving Tabaran record, Archie's Jammy Dreaming, Christine's Styling Up, and probably the first George Talek record, but the self-titled one. It was just like these artists had something really important to say culturally and artistically, and they could draw on some different sort of musical a musical heritage that I found really exciting to work with, and I have, I've produced albums and done soundtracks that had got nothing to do with First Nations people, but it was just this situation kind of was there, and it for me, to making music, to have the energy and the time that's needed to make, to get right inside a record. For me, it's a lot easier when it's something I go, wow, this is really important. People really need to hear Archie's songs about domestic violence. People need to hear George's songs about what Rabaul was like during the Second World War from the stories that his uncles had told. People needed to hear Christine's urban, kind of cool, young, confident woman, this islander part of Australia. And I was able to do, with My Friendly Chocolate Cake, I was able to do my own little urban and Not Drowning Waving, and solo stuff, do the songs that were important to me and my take on the world, the suburbs, the desert, the, relationships, people you meet. But in producing, this was sort of something to me that it was those things that attracted me to it and appealed.
I was going to say, and that passion seemed, and please correct me if I'm not framing this right, but you had somewhat, and you may still have had some activism in that area around human rights and the West Papua situation and stuff like that. Is that still something that's, it's trivializing it, saying, has it captured your imagination? But you know what I mean, as far as, is that still something that's central?
That's so, I mean, this is what music was in the 60s, and the music had this, it was the sound of revolution, going way back. African-American music, the jazz and blues was like people who were kind of, not afforded rights, and was one area where African-Americans could get on the telly and could be in people's living rooms and could be, giving something of their culture. And then the 60s and the 70s, it was like, it was kicking against, Vietnam's and El Salvador's and the women's rights movements and, post Second World War, the thoughts of younger people who were trying to set up a frame that wasn't so Second World War related. And so there was a bit of the generation gap was quite strong, and that's music does that really, really well. So and I think it's part of what rock and roll is. It's part of and whilst it doesn't have to be, it's having having substance in what the idea behind the music is, which might not just be the words, it might just be what that person's like on stage or what they represent. Or so that's been a driving force.
We ask all our guests, David, based on their history and experience of being a keyboard player. What are lessons, or just a musician generally? What are lessons you would pass on to other people coming up in the industry, or maybe just playing in their local pub on the weekend for fun?
As a keyboard player, the first thing I would say is always lift with your legs, not your back. Because as we all know, keyboards are heavy. I often give advice to young people. When I was at school and I was learning piano, I had a piano teacher who I really didn't like, and she was a bit of a bat. And there were times when I kind of thought, I actually even remember at one point I was kind of faking sickies on the day I had piano lessons, and I kind of wanted to give it up. I'm so glad that I didn't. So my mum didn't want me to give it up because she thought I showed promise. And I always started, kids who are kind of getting a bit sick of it, going, if you can persevere with it, it's really worth doing, because when the world's giving you the shits, there's nothing better than going into your own room and playing on your instrument. This doesn't mean that you need to be someone who goes out and performs on stage or makes a career out of it, but music can take you to a place that very few other things can, and it's a great escape from the mundanity of the rest of the world. It's a great it's great for your head, it's great for your space, it's great for your sense of self, and it's a cool thing to do. And then also, then there's these other things you can communicate, play with other people, and the bounce of musical ideas is quite joyous. And it's kind of hard to explain to people who aren't musicians about, you hear this little motif and you go, yeah, that's cool, and you kind of jump on it and do something a little bit different. So there's a couple of things. I also, to the young artists who are making a record, I say try to find what it is that you do that is unique, because there's so many musicians out in the world, there's so many people putting records out, that if you've got something that identifies a unique story that is part of you, your family, your culture, your take on things, that's going to, it's important to give life to that story, but it's also it gives you a point of difference.
They're great tips. That's really good, David. And speaking of playing, I noticed behind you you've got, and we're not going to talk gear much, but I know you've got a couple of shows coming up later in the year. Are those the Hydrosynth and your Nord stage there two of your go-to pieces of gear?
Studio-wise, the Hydrosynth.
Yeah.
And who would have thought that a Chinese synthesizer that had mainly been involved with software, not hardware. But I love it. I really,
it's a beast.
It's fantastic. I had the Nord lead, that was kind of my synthesizer that was always just lying around, which I still have, but until I get the studio going, the Nord stage I really like as a live keyboard. I like it as I normally I think it's got a pretty decent digital piano sound. I'll always use an acoustic piano if I can. I do have a grand piano and it's sitting in storage at the moment. And the studio being built in here still a year off. So but yeah, the acoustic piano is you can't beat it. Although there's some kind of half decent sort of altered piano sounds that the Nord has it's got really good Wurlitzer sounds and sort of distorted Hammondy, John Lord kind of things. Yeah. And the other thing I use, obviously, over the years, I've just built up a big hard drive full of, loops and sounds and whether it be natural sounds or, cars going over rickety bridges and looping that and all that kind of thing. So between something that's like a real keyboard, like a piano organ strings kind of thing, the sound effects, the analog and digital kind of synthesized sounds and texture things that you can get from the Hydrasynth or the Nord Lead, and then whether it be in Pro Tools or Logic, just grabbing some of these other sounds and mucking with them, and that tends to be the basic palette for me. Anyway.
David, what's the grand piano you have in storage? What is
it's
it?
Yamaha G4, and I got it for about 10,000 a long time ago, and it's been well looked after, and it's been used on a lot of records, and I really, really like the sound of it. I've got an upright piano in the house. It's kind of cool as well, and sometimes that's not. And I the other thing. Oh, can you see the pump organ?
Yeah, I was about to ask you about that. Yeah,
I love it. It's like, the organ that was used in churches that didn't have power, so in the country in the old days. I remember seeing Nico play pump organ. Ivor Cutler, the kind of absurdist Scottish poet. Anyway, but yeah, that's kind of it's lumpy, and it's 43% sharp. So whenever you play it, it's unbearable, and then you de-pitch it back to 440. Harmoniums and pump organs are always really sharp. I don't know what it is, and because to use them live, Chocolate Cake was the best thing to do because it's all acoustic. But Helen and Hope, being string players, rightfully go, it's nowhere tuning up 0.5% for you, so they never got. Yeah.
And I'm glad. I'm assuming your new studio's on the ground floor, David, so you're not trying to get that grand piano up stairs. I remember the day I last talked to you many years ago. I'd spent the morning with David Hirschfelder, and you had to have a grand piano craned into the second floor.
Wow. Well, it's not going to be on the ground floor. It'll be lifted up a bit, although it's on a hill, so there will be access to be able to.
Good. I can imagine that's an undertaking.
Yes. Yeah.
So David, we ask all our guests to regale us with a favourite anecdote that's in relation to a live technical or musical train wreck that's happened to you on stage. Have you got anything for us?
Well, the best one I can think of is that, look, there are many over the years. You accumulate these things, but during a big My Friendly Chocolate Cake song, my keyboard stand collapsed. So I'll send you a photo of this.
That'd be great. It'll go on.
Printed. But basically, this bit's still up. This bit had collapsed to the ground. So the piano's at like a 45-degree angle. My microphone's up there. And I just kept going because the song, we were kicking it with the song, and it's like, it's still working. So I'm sort of playing like this, and Dean and Greg in the background are kind of pissing themselves laughing, and but it did make for a good photo, and under the theme, the show must go on. It kind of worked, but there is also Phil Wales, my guitarist, always has a theory that, when your keyboard, when a synthesizer goes to a preset that's not the one that you want to use, it always goes to something called Electric Warrior or something that kind of is the most, ridiculous, one of those sounds that you would never use, one of those preset sounds that you would never use, and there's nothing subtle about it at all. It kind of has 15 delays on it and kind of portamento and kind of, yeah. But
that is so true. That is so true. And you're not the first. I reckon we've had other guests say that similar thing. But That's certainly been my experience. Whenever you hit the wrong patch, it's always something stupid that just doesn't work at all.
There's nothing. Yeah, it never goes to a tasteful whirl so that you go, oh, okay. It's just like, whoa.
Yeah, that is so true. Awesome story. Thank you so much. Yeah, we'd love that.
I'll send that photo. Yeah, no, it is.
Yeah.
I mean, I look stupid in it, but I'm kind of prepared to go down with the ship on that one.
Awesome, and we'll pop that up. We'll pop that up with the podcast, so that'd be great.
Yeah.
Now, look, another question we always ask is we love to get inspiration from our guests as to other guests that we might potentially interview. So, if you were to play tag and tag another keyboard player who maybe our listeners and viewers would love to learn about, who might that be, David?
Oh, there's. I mean, Conway Savage would be a great one, but he's no longer with us. Conway's records, and I would implore people to kind of search him out. He passed away a couple of years ago, but Conway, who's Cash Savage's uncle, the young woman who's quite an astonishing artist and songwriter. But Conway used to do. He's kind of like. I was always been a big fan of that John Cale's piano and vocal shows that he did, and I saw a few at the Universal Theatre and over in New York as well at different times. And Conway Savage had that kind of space and sort of dark songs, but there was a real beauty in them as well, and I really liked his playing as a piano player. There's an Australian woman who releases records in Holland named Karen Vogt, V-O-G.
Okay.
She's really good. That's kind of more in your sort of
great
atmospheric world. Oh, look, there's so many, you know.
Yeah, no, they're two good suggestions, and it's not unusual for us to get suggestions for people that have sadly passed on. So even though we can't pull that off, it's still a great mention.
Oh, look, artist. Listeners, keyboard players, look up Conway's stuff. Conway Savage, it's an easy name to remember. And they're great records. They're really wonderful. They're really wonderful piano and vocal albums.
And speaking of inspirational, it's the Desert Island Disc question, David. So 5 albums that have had a huge influence on your life. Doesn't have to be your favourite 5, but just 5 that you,
So you flagged this ahead of time, which is good because it's kind of, I mean, there's so many great records in the world. Caught and Sparked by Joni Mitchell, I'll start with, because when I was 13, my sister was 15, so she was cooler than I was. So as well as nicking out and smoking banked cigarettes or something, I would also listen to her vinyl collection. And there was something in the way that Joni Mitchell played the piano, her voicings on that record that I really like, and I sort of think has still stuck with me today. Basic stuff, playing a D chord in the right hand and an E in the left hand, and then, and playing, seconds and fourths and sixths and working around that. And the way that she sang to her piano playing, that was an influential record for me. Both Laughing Stock or Spirit of Eden by Talk Talk, or the Mark Hollis album, in terms of, well, the Talk Talk band sound to me is just astonishingly good. Such sensitive playing and such power, and then be able to drop it back to the lightness of a feather. Hollis's voice is a thing of absolute beauty. So that's a band that I love. Yeah, really, really love. The Reels, Quasimodo Dream, for a keyboard player. Geez, Craig Cooper's stuff on that, and the way that Dave Mason's lyrics. He used to have a kick at things quite well, but that Quasimodo's Dream, I used to always, people from overseas musicians who said, I want something from Australia that I probably wouldn't have heard of. I always suggest Quasimodo's Dream by the Reels. So there are other ones as well, the Models, Alpha Bravo, and Local Andrew Gamble would be
great
one.
picks. Yeah.
I wanted to choose a punk or a post-punk record because it was a style of music that really influenced me at a time when music meant everything in terms of identity. But there was a real musicality to albums like 154 by Wire or Correct Use of Soap by Magazine, and these were bands full of great musicians. I did like that sort of post-punk ethic that I think I've tried to carry through with stuff that I've not just because you can play these really difficult things, you don't necessarily, you don't have to do it. And that the whole band sound is what you're listening to. Which is not to say that, you know, sometimes I can listen to jazz records and really appreciate the individuality of the playing and the style and everything. Magazine and Wire are two ripping records for me. There's especially as we're talking desert island discs, there's an artist who we released on the One Talk label called Tio. He comes from Vanuatu. You can look up on the One Talk Bandcamp site. Tio, spelled T-I-O. Really, really beautiful record. So here is someone who sings in language. It uses some Melanesian. He's from Vanuatu, from the island of Ambrym. It's a really special record. That, and obviously a part of the world that I've had my ears and eyes on to. Yeah.
Great picks. No, superb picks. Thank you for that. And then our final thing that we do, David, is the Quickfire 10. So 10, and they're very quick-fire questions. Just answer them. They mostly yes or no or two-choice questions.
Okay, cool.
Hit it, Paul.
I reckon I already know the answer to this, but the question is acoustic or digital piano?
Acoustic.
Sitting or standing when playing? I know the answer to this one as well.
Oh, sitting, except when in a big band, I like to stand.
Yeah, okay. I think, and I don't want to predict this one, but I think I know the answer. Guitars, sexy or an abomination?
Abomination.
Fantastic. Transpose button or adjust yourself?
Adjust yourself, although if somebody's playing a song in E flat minor, I would have total respect for using the transpose button.
That's right. I know this is a hard one, Dave, but favourite song you've written?
Yeah. I'll go the Gossip from My Friend the Shelter Cat, but that's the first one that came to mind that I quite like the simplicity of the lyric. Yeah.
Awesome. Last gig you attended as an audience member?
Last gig I attended as an audience member was Emma Donovan and Cash Savage down at the Apollo Bay Memorial Hall as part of the Winter Wild Festival a few weeks ago.
Nice.
That was good, and it was really good, yeah.
Best things about live gigs if you're performing?
Equally between the interplay between the musicians you're playing with, but the relationship between the band or the solo performer and the audience, you just can't beat it. And just amplified over COVID that, and it's not, sometimes it's expressions on people's face, sometimes it's somebody tapping their foot, sometimes it's somebody spilling a drink at the most inopportune moment.
Cool. As a performer, the worst thing about live gigs?
Carrying the keyboard up the stairs. And waiting around. So much time wasted as a musician. The classic Charlie Watts line about 5% playing gigs and 95% waiting around, or maybe I've got the statistic wrong. Maybe he went 99% of the time you're waiting around and 1% you're playing music. But yeah, it's a lot.
A lot of waiting, yeah.
Yeah.
Name one thing you'd like to see invented to make your life as a keyboard player easier.
Blow up grand piano.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Or the detachable grand piano, that you could put together and would be in perfect tune. But yeah, no, it's possible. They've invented other things that you wouldn't have thought would have happened. The internet, for example.
True. Favorite non-musical activity or hobby?
Walking with my dogs on the beach.
What sort of dogs?
I've got a border collie named Vera, and Betty's a coolie Cooley's like it's got a bit of dingo in it. Betty is a singing dog. I could send you a clip of that too. Betty's like, she is it's difficult because sitting there and mucking around with something in the house, Betty will come and sing along. And sometimes she gets a bit overexcited, so the singing can merge into barking.
That's right.
But they're both beautiful dogs, and I've got 2 donkeys as well. So, but they don't come down the beach.
Oh, that's right. I did read on your website. That's a short list for your new studio.
Oh yes, the donkey shed is at this stage firm favourite. David,
there you go. No, David, look, can't thank you enough for spending this hour with us. It's been brilliant. I've had the pleasure of seeing you sort of played a range of venues from tiny little pubs to Belvoir Street Theatre, large theatres and so on. And the passion with which you've talked today and that you put into your music's always been gobsmacking. So, yeah, really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. So there we have it. As always, Paul, brilliant to talk to David. As I mentioned in the show, I've had the pleasure of seeing David perform a few times, and it really is just a stunning experience seeing him behind the piano and singing.
Yeah, look, it was very cool to chat to him, and like all our guests, he was super generous with his thoughts, and it was nice to explore some of the things that motivate him and what drives his passions in his music.
Yeah, no, absolute pleasure. So huge thanks to David for taking the time. And I promise that as far as I know, our next 4 or 5 guests don't have the word David in their name. So that's 2 Davids in a row as guests, or 3 episodes. So I promise it'll be a David-free zone aside from myself next episode. So yeah, thanks everyone for listening. Again, as always, a quick shout out to our gold and silver supporters, the Core Chrome user group. Thanks to you, Greg, Brother Paul Brown from the Water Boys and many other outfits. Brother Paul Brown is still doing the do and having a wonderful time doing it. Tammy Catcher of Tammy's Musical Stew, hugely appreciate your support, Tammy, as always. And Dave and the team at the musicplayer.com forums, thank you for your support as well. So we'll be back again in the next few weeks, but just a reminder, we'd love to hear from you. So our website is www.keyboardchronicles.com. Facebook, we're at facebook.com/Keyboard Chronicles. Twitter at the Keyboard CHR1. We're on Instagram at the Keyboard Chronicles. And I never would have thought this, Paul, but I never realized such a graphically intensive platform is a great place to have chats with musicians. Our Instagram is where I tend to have a lot of the chats now. A lot of people like touching base there, which we love. And if you do like good old-fashioned email, then do drop us a line at editor@keyboardchronicles.com. If you want to support us to keep this little boat afloat and continue to expand what we do, there's 2 ways to do that. We have a Patreon account at patreon.com/Keyboard Chronicles, where you can get access to bonus content and a range of other things. So check that out. And we also do have a merchandise page on the keyboardchronicles.com website. So there's roughly, I've lost count now, 50 or 60 pieces of artwork related to keyboards, synths, abstract interpretations of those, digital art that can go on T-shirts, great studio wall art. We've had a couple of people, I know one person's bought 2 pieces of wall art for their studio and are loving it. So just at keyboardchronicles.com, you'll see the merchandise tab there. Every bit of that helps. Paul, thank you, sir, for joining me. I couldn't do it without you.
Well, you probably could, but it's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be here. I love working with you, David, and chatting to these amazing keyboard players. Thanks again for having me on.
No problem. So, and most importantly, thanks to all of you out there for listening or watching, and we'll see you back here next episode. Da, da, da.